especially in Germany, one should say, simply because data protection is something that is very close at heart of not just the lawmakers, not just the politicians, but of the system that was set up to protect consumers, to protect data. And the gentleman who is going to sort of talk about boundaries, how to surmount them and where to stop is Stefan Schicker. He's been working in that field for the last 10 years, sort of basically ever since he became a lawyer. In his own practice, his cases are mostly concerning those that are just touching the boundaries and the borders of legality, and that's when it's starting to hurt. So Stefan is going to share with us the European harmonization efforts and a lot of other issues. And right at the moment, simply because I've got the usual problem being in the light and looking into the dark. Stefan, where are you?
I'm right here.
Ah, wonderful. Give him a big hand. You know, it's early in the morning, but we can all use... Yes, wonderful. So take it away.
Good morning. I'm Stefan Schicker. So welcome. Great that you're all here. You know, when Karl-Heinz invited me to be here at the breakfast session, I thought, gosh, that's going to be a tough program to have data protection for breakfast. And I thought about this for a moment, and then I came up with the idea to say, no, actually, it's not such a bad thing, because you know, if you're considering that the breakfast is an important meal in the morning, and the saying is that if you are starting out the day with a good breakfast, you are healthier for the rest of your life. There's a little bit similarity to data protection as well. Because if you're taking into account data protection and the legal issues on a strategic point of view, then it might help you in the long run to develop a more stable business and to be more on the safe side. So that's why I've been invited here to talk a little bit about the legal do's and don'ts on data. As already mentioned, my name is Stefan Schicker, and basically my two main areas of law are e-commerce and trademarks. I started out pretty early, not as a lawyer actually, but rather as a programmer, because my first experience with a computer was in 1985 when I got my first Commodore computer. Some of you might remember. Anyone still has one Commodore computer? No? Well, actually, mine is still working. It's rather working for having lights flashing when you have a party, something like that. But it's still there. And I started to program web pages in the beginning of the 90s. I learned how to program PHP and HTML and MySQL, and it's a thrilling time to see what has been going on in these couple of years. And if you consider, you know, the Commodore computer at that time and what we have in our pockets nowadays, it's just very impressive to see the developments. Now, as with a doctor, you specialize in a certain area, and then if you have problems with your headache, then you don't go to a knee doctor. So I've organized our practice with a couple of colleagues, and we're a law firm based in Germany with an international network, and we have about 100 attorneys all over Germany. So that's my practice where I'm coming from. And basically the idea of legal developments in the social media area and in the internet area is something that really has been going on for quite a while now. And I started out to practice law about 10 years ago, and at that time really nothing was written, the laws were completely changing and so on. And nowadays we have a completely different structure. You know, you're using data in social networks and so on. And one thing that really often gets forgotten is that if you use social media data, it's basically not really your own data, but it's rather borrowed data, because you're dependent on the platform where you're getting the data from. And to have this data in your own accounts is quite an important area. You know, considering email. I mean, anybody of you still using emails? No? Yeah? couple of them. Okay. Well, it's even half of you're still using emails. No, just kidding. I was on a conference in Cologne about 3 years ago, and I was giving a presentation on email newsletter stuff. And in the next room, people were talking about social media and all these areas. And I said, God, what an old-fashioned topic email is. But on the other hand, having an email distribution list is something that you really have. You can keep that and you can have it for the next years. Considering the data on platforms, even the big platforms haven't been there 5 years ago, and you never know if it's the same platforms that you're using in the next 5 years. So it's really interesting to see which platforms you can rely on and what kind of legal implications you have. Because, one platform that really is very popular is, for example, the platform Pinterest. And you might have heard of it. Anyone of you has an account with Pinterest? Yeah, good. Who of you is from Germany? Oh, okay, cool. Now, even in the US, Pinterest is the fastest growing platform at all times, I think. And the interesting thing is that, if from a legal side, somebody would ask me to develop the most copyright infringing the platform, then I probably would program something like Pinterest. Because it's the infringing ability mechanism that you get for copying and pasting. And since copying and pasting is such an easy topic that is going on in the computer area, it is not really in the heads of people that this might be infringing laws. But copyright laws on the other side are they're all over the world and are in place all over the world. So basically, if you're copying and pasting on Pinterest, in many times you're committing a copyright infringement. That's the lawyer's talk. But on the other hand, if I look at the platform, it's beautiful. It's wonderful to have all these pictures structured there on the platform, and it works. And a lot of people are using it. So you have to consider whether what you are having in the legal area really is the bottom line that you have to go down to, or the area that you really have to consider. Because, as it always is in theory, you have black and you have white, and you exactly know what you can do or what you can't. And in practice, basically, you never have the black and white areas, but you always have shades of gray. And you have to consider how deep is the shade of gray, and can I afford with my firm to use that kind of legal structure, or do I really have to be completely sober and use that in a different area? Because one thing that you really have to keep in mind, and that's something that is often forgotten, is that the area of social networks, from my point of view, it can always be considered to be an area we call law plus, law plus something. You know where that is coming from? No? I'll tell you. See, we have a lot of legal codes, laws, like the civil code laws, like the data protection laws, like the unfair competition laws, like the telemedia laws. And these different legal codes are overlapping, and the only good thing is that they are all written by very diligent and understanding and wise people who can draft the text so clearly that it's easily understandable for everybody at any time. Huh? You see where I'm getting at? It's not. It's even in the legal area, it's already important and difficult to understand what kind of implications you have. But yet, in the social media area, we not only have the codes, but we have, in addition, another set of rules, and that's the terms and conditions of the platform operators. And that's basically something where you can think about having this as a legal code as well. But it's not a national legal code. It's an international cultural code that is set up by the platforms, and of course it's written from their point of view. So considering you are a platform operator, what do you want the platform to do? You want it to run very smoothly. You want it to have no problems. You want to keep people from fighting on the platform, but you want to develop the platform. So if you're looking at the terms and conditions of the platforms, that's an additional set of rules that you have to obey. So if you take the two areas in conjunction, you'll see that it is a very difficult area, and in many respects, we still have open questions that still have not been clarified. Now, from all areas that are legally important on an international scale, I think that the most important area is data privacy. And data privacy is an area that has been around, not just now. It's something that is really developing and going on for the last, let's say, 20 years. And 20 years from a legal point of view, we're talking about so many different, so different time scales if we're talking about the implications that we have here on social platforms. Considering the development of Instagram. Who has Instagram? Am I wrong? Or is that less than Pinterest? That's interesting. Okay, Instagram is still an interesting platform. And they wanted to start out with social networking, and then there was this other firm that said, well, that's interesting. And we had Tim yesterday, and he mentioned that Instagram has been integrated into Facebook, and we all know how much money was spent and so on. But one thing that I thought was very interesting, I heard a podcast from somebody who was a fan of Instagram, and they said, well, I'm a big fan of Instagram, and it's wonderful, and I like it. And now these guys from Facebook have bought it, and I hope they don't change it too much, because Facebook is the platform for the old people. Yeah? And, that's a platform that has been on the market for, let's say, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, something like that. So, the times are changing rapidly. And as you know, the legal developments are much slower. And it takes much longer to install the legal implications into the different countries. And, it's an international thing. I mean, the Internet is something that is not, stopping at the borders of your country. Or do you, anybody has the implications that you have the Internet only in your country? I mean, the interesting thing is that in Germany it's even more difficult because you have not only one authority that is dealing with data protection, but you have 16 authorities in the different states of Germany that are all talking about data protection regulations. And so in conjunction, we have some data protection officers who are very strict, and some are rather open. Nevertheless, data privacy is getting up much more speed. And one thing that Martha also mentioned in her book is that you need trust in order to build a relationship with people. And I think that data privacy is something that is one of the key assets to build this trust for the future for your platform. So data privacy is often a little bit misunderstood, though, because data privacy is not everything that is connected with any data. But the important part is that you have to have personal data. So personal data means that either a person has to be identified precisely or has to be identifiable at least. So take my email address, for example. My private email address is stefan@schicker.de. If I asked you now, even if it's early in the morning, who would say this is not a personal information? You're all awake. Perfect. So it's pretty clear in this respect. Take my business email address. It's s.schicker. That's a little bit more shade of gray already, because S could be Stefan, could be Sebastian, could be Sabine, you name it. So the question really is down to this level to find out if something is really personal data or not. And personal data on one side, when the person is identified clearly, that is one thing, and identifiable is the other thing. And keep that in mind, because we'll come to that in a second, because it's one of the central areas that we need to keep in mind in data protection in social networks. Now, the principle in data protection is that you cannot do anything with personal data if you do not have the consent or some kind of a legal exception. And the most important legal exception is that you can use the data if you need it to fulfill the service. Okay? Now, I make an old school example. Do you remember postal mail? you know, the thing with the white envelopes. Yeah, you write something on there and you give it to the postal guy and say, hey, please deliver this letter to the other side. And the postman looks at you and he says, hey, this envelope is white. There's no address on there. And you're saying, yeah, I can't give it to you because it's data protection and you know, it's personal data, so I'm not allowed to give it to you. Now, of course, you might get a smile from the postal officer because that's not how it works in practice. And as a matter of fact, he needs the name and probably the street and the city and the postal code in order to deliver this letter to the recipient. Now, in respect to data protection, you can give this information to him, but not all other information in addition. So if you're considering a telephone number, for example, in addition, do you need to give a telephone number to the postal guy for him to deliver it? You know, maybe an argument could be that you give it to him in order that if he doesn't meet the recipient, he could call him and ask where he is. That would probably be possible. But, you know, considering an email address, that probably would be too much for the people to give that to the postal guy, because it's his competitor, so he never needs an email address in order to deliver the letter. Now, the important thing is that if you don't have this legal exception, which in very little cases you have to have consent from the party that you're using the personal data from. And that sometimes brings us into a very difficult area, because we as firms have to talk to the people that want to use our services, and we have to ask them for consent in order to be able to use that data. And I told you that you should keep in mind the word identifiable. An IP address. You know what an IP address is, correct? You're all tech guys, marketing, Even if I asked you if you don't know what an IP address is, probably you wouldn't raise your hand because you would be embarrassed. But, you all know that IP addresses are important and that they are the central area of communicating for computers in the internet. Now, IP addresses are, from a German point of view, seen to be personal data. And that is a development that really thrilled me, because it's been coming up for the last 3 years already. In 2009, the first decision in Germany by the 16 authorities, they sat together and talked about, well, should an IP address be personal data, yes or no? When I heard this thought for the first time, I thought, that's not possible. If I have your IP address, I couldn't do anything with it. But, looking at it from a bigger scale, like data protection people do that, you could say, well, if you have the IP address and if you have all the knowledge in the world that you need, you probably have the timestamp when it was used, and you have all the information from the telecom provider who's running the service, and then you can find out who the connection belongs to, and then you have the personal data. Now, that was a development that really thrilled me in the beginning, but it's starting to get up speed and to develop into the central area that in Germany and even in some of the European court decisions, IP addresses have been regarded to be personal information. And that really brings us into a big dilemma, because a lot of services using IP addresses, in addition to what we usually use them, and that really brings us into a legal problem. And I've been on a discussion about 2 weeks ago regarding, do we still need data protection? Where is it going to? What is the problem? And of course, we have on one side the real strict data protection officers, and I probably would say that it's rather open and relaxed in the US, while it is more strict and severe in Germany, where you have all the data protection officers. And you might have heard of the escapades of some of the data protection officers who wanted to forbid basically the internet and the use of the internet. And the opposite development is the post-privacy development, where you have people that are saying, we don't care about protecting our personal data. But on the other hand, I think, again, you have the black and the white, and the truth and the reality, and the development that we will have in the future probably will be there somewhere in the middle. So the most important area is that, and that's basically something that's coming out of both discussions, is that if you want to use the data, you have to be transparent towards the user, and you have to show them what you're doing with the data, and then this could be a possibility to use this information. Now, as I had mentioned, the proceedings with courts are way slow, But what we're discovering is that it's getting more severe. Playtime is over, and the first decisions in legal areas have been made. So, for example, the friends finders function of Facebook, you know that, where you put in your name, your email address, basically, and your password. Yeah, and then you give it to Facebook, and then they find out who of your friends are with you on Facebook. And that has been in discussion in court decisions, and it has been forbidden now, which was obvious from the beginning. But the proceedings were started about 2 years ago, and only now they have been decided. I mean, Facebook changed the function already a year ago, so it didn't really affect this in practice. But it shows that the courts are starting to take on the cases, and probably the bigger the platform, the more the risk exists that you are in trouble, and that you might have problems with the developments. But the proceedings are getting more and more severe and more important to take into account. And one thing that the decision of the Facebook button, especially in Germany, has brought is that not only the authorities have the possibility to address the misuse of data, but also competitors. And that brings it to another level, because authorities are always too small, they are always slow, and they always are understaffed. So the risk that you're running from an authority is rather limited. Although we'll see that even they are using internet and computers in the way of screening the internet. But if your competitor can aggress you because you have committed a data protection issue, then it's getting really to another level and to another problem. Now, I want to make an example which some of you might know. Has anybody of you seen this button before? Tim? No. Okay. Now, this button has been the most viral and great development for the internet and for Facebook's platform, in order to spread the word, in order to get the message out, and in order to connect websites and social networks and all that information. It's a perfect tool for viral marketing and really great. From a legal point of view, it's much more difficult. The problem is that the function of the like button really isn't that easy. It's not a graphic that you're including, but it's rather some kind of technology that you're including. I mean, maybe some of you have included it yourself. You know that it's a programming code, yeah? A programming code that you include in the website, and then something happens. Do you know what it is? Maybe not. And maybe that's the problem, because, if we have transmission of data from one country to another country, then we have a bigger problem than if we have it in one country. And if we transmit this data to another country that is not on an equal level of data protection, then we really have a big problem. And, the European countries have an adequate level of, or a comparable level of data protection. So if you transfer data from one country in the European Union to the other country, then it's basically not a bigger problem than if you transfer data within your own country. That's one thing. But if you transfer data outside of the European Union, if it's, in bad countries like the US, where data protection standards are not as high as in the EU, then you really have a problem from a data protection point of view. And considering the function of the Facebook button, that's basically what's happening. So, to make an example, if you have a website, if you're running a website, somebody's going on your website. He's, challenging your website, and it's loaded, and in the instant, the technology of Facebook is doing something. It's opening up an iframe and asking Facebook, hey, can you give me some more information? And this information is brought back, and then the button is displayed. So the question is, what's happening here? What information is transferred in this area? And basically, we don't know. And unfortunately, Facebook really doesn't tell us. What we found out so far is that it's 53 different categories of data that is being transferred when this button is opened up. Starting from the username to the location where they have logged in if they've used a mobile device, to the question what kind of computer do they have, how many users are on the computer, who is the main user, what's their personal information, and so on. So a lot of information is transferred. 53 categories have been publicized because Facebook has been talking to the Irish data protection authorities. That was already made public. And in the statement that they've sent to the data protection authorities, another 40 additional categories have been found out that have been transferred. And it's this intransparency that's making it really a problem from a legal point of view, because one of my nerd friends, who's even more nerdy than me in respect to computers, has opened up a virtual machine and installed a clean operating system and a clean browser and just opened the like button, and then the computer opened up 16 connections to different computers. Some of them were referring to Facebook. Others were, and then we just didn't know where it's coming from, this information. Now, if we're taking this into account with our strategy that we just discussed before, that we want to have transparency and that we want to have clear information on what kind of information is transferred, this is really bringing us into a problem, especially if we don't know what kind of information that is. And from a German point of view, and that really was a severe decision, is that the data protection authorities in Germany decided last year in December that the like button is not legally conform and that you're basically not allowed to use it. When I heard that, it was on the 6th of December last year, it's like, what? What do you want us to do? Pull the cable and stop the internet? It's completely ridiculous not to use this button. On the other hand, it's pretty clear that it is an infringement of data protection laws. So it really is a big problem that we're struggling in Germany with. And there's one thing that you can do. There's a publishing house, Heise, it's called. They have developed a little software that you can install on your browser or on your websites. And if the website is loaded, then basically not the like button is loaded, but only a second level of information that is showed, where you can say, if you want to use the like button, click here. The good thing is, in this instance, not really, if the website is only loaded, the information is not already transferred to Facebook, because then people really can react and can say, yes, I have the transparency and I want to transfer this data, and now I click on this second level button, and then the original button from Facebook is launched, and the information is transferred. The problem is, if you have the second level, basically you would have to have a consent and tell people what kind of information you're transmitting. And, considering that it's, as I mentioned, about 80 categories of information that are transferred, consider this in a pop-up window, saying, do you consent to transfer this information to the US? And then the complete screen is blocked. In practice, this really doesn't work. And the other thing is that it's really difficult, because the information is changing and it's not really strictly clear what kind of information actually is transferred. So that is something that is being developed at the moment. But the crucial situation is that basically the like button is forbidden in Germany, which is a situation that firms have to cope with at the moment, to say, well, do we still want to use this button, or do we accept the two-click solution as an intermediary solution, or do we have to take it down, which some authorities in Germany have been doing because they had the political pressure to obey what the data protection officers mentioned. Now, the other opportunity is to talk to the data protection authorities, and that's what Google has been doing with Google Analytics. Anyone of you using Google Analytics? Is that getting less? I mean, it's interesting because, about 2 years ago, I asked who's using Google Analytics. Everyone was like, yeah, I am. Then we had the problems in Germany with data protection, but, not all of you are from Germany. But if I'm considering the hands that I just saw, it's quite little that are still using Google Analytics. Nevertheless, it's an important and good and cheap tool that you can use. And in Germany, Google has been sitting with the data protection authorities in order to discuss how can we find a solution. And, a lot of strict data protection officers are saying, this is not a correct and 100% solution, but it's working. And it's a good solution that has been discussed with the data protection officer of Hamburg. And it's a solution that is really working in practice at the moment. And there's 5 steps that you have to obey. And the one thing is that you have to use the anonymized IP function, which is an additional code that you put into your website. And of course, you have to change your data protection statements on the website in order to inform people that you're using this data, and then that they can have plugins installed that Google Analytics is not using their site. And the last thing that you have to do is basically to sign a contract with Google, asking them to do the data processing for you in respect to analytics. And you remember the postal guy I've been talking about. He's been challenged with a lot of work, because if you want to sign this contract, actually you have to do it in a written form. And Google has been presenting this draft for the contract. It's about 15 pages long, and you can put in your name and your address here and your UID for the tracking code, and then you send it to Google. I mean, look at this document. It's printed both sides. Anybody read that? Yeah, you have to, because here's another signature area that you have to sign. Well, actually, you're doing this. You're sending it to Google. Google is signing this and sending it back to you. The times are about 2 weeks that it takes to get this. And if you're doing this, you can use Google Analytics in a legally conform way. To be honest, this probably is not the most thrilling and sexy way to have a data protection issue solved, but it's one thing how it can be solved in practice. And actually, that is something that we're experiencing in a lot of ways, that data protection is taken more and more seriously, and it's been brought into a central area so that it really is working, even though it's more work than possible or than necessary. In the area of social media ranking, for example, it is very interesting to use all this data. We're talking about big data. Even the big authorities in Germany are talking about big data, collecting this data, using it. Like the Schufa had a big problem, because they said, well, can we take all the information from Facebook and use it in order to have scoring values for our customers? And it was tremendous discussion going on in press, and it only took 2 days for Schufa to say, no, we didn't really take this seriously. It was just a thought, And then they retracted, although we know, on the other hand, that a lot of data is used. But you can, and we've been writing a statement in this respect, you can use social media ranking data in a specific way, even though you're obeying the data protection rules. And it is important to keep that in mind, and in order to keep this the legal developments in mind, because coming back to our Law Plus idea, we all know the sanctions that you have from your competitors, where you get a letter before action or you get an action or whatever. But one thing that is coming in addition is the problem that you get sanctions from the authorities and from the platforms themselves. And a lot of platforms, most of them, have in their conditions that if you're not obeying their platform rules, they can kick you out. And if you started to collect data and you're just there and you've just set up all your system and it's not working and you're facing these sanctions, this really can be a tremendous problem. So, to sum it up, basically, I thought I wanted to give you an idea of what data protection is like, that it's an important issue that you have to keep in mind. And, summing it up in our breakfast session wording, let data protection be your cereal. Thank you very much for your attention.